Welcome to The Explainer. You know, sometimes the biggest life lessons come from the smallest things. Today we're going to look at an essay that does just that. It takes a simple childhood toy and uses it to tackle a huge question. How do you stay centered when the world feels like it's constantly trying to push you around?
So this whole idea kicks off with a really beautiful memory from the author's childhood, way back in rural Korea. And it's a little counterintuitive, right? Because for them, the best days were the absolute coldest days of winter.
Why? Well, because when it got cold enough, the rice paddies would just freeze solid. I mean, can you imagine? They turned into this giant, perfect, natural ice rink. For all the kids in the village, this was the place to be. The author says it was, without a doubt, the best part of the whole year.
And yeah, they played all sorts of games out there on the ice. Sledding, skating, you name it. But there was this one toy, something really simple, that had a much deeper meaning. And that was the spinning top.
Okay, so when you think spinning top, don't picture the plastic ones you might find today. No, these were old school, carved from wood. And getting one to spin just right, man, that was tough. It wasn't something you just figured out. It took tons of practice, a lot of failed attempts. It was a real skill.
So what was the secret? The author explains that it wasn't just about whipping it as hard as you could. The real key was physics. It was all about understanding a little concept called the center of gravity.
And the author breaks this down into three essential parts. First, you've got the top itself. The design is just genius, right? This big wooden body, but all its weight is focused on one teeny tiny metal point. Second, you've got to give it a really good initial throw. That first burst of energy is what gets the whole thing started. And third, and this is super important, the whip. You're not just smacking it around. It's all about these little, careful taps that keep the momentum going and keep the weight focused right on that center point.
And this is where we make the big leap. The essay pivots from this really concrete memory of a toy on a frozen field to a huge, powerful metaphor for how we live our lives.
So let's get into it. How on earth does the physics of a toy connect to a philosophy for living your life?
The comparison the author makes is incredibly clear. A life that has found its center is stable. It's resilient. You know, it might get bumped around a little, shaken by life, but it always finds its way back to being upright. On the flip side, a life that's off-center, well, it's easily pushed over by what's going on around it. It just kind of wanders with no real direction.
Okay, so what are these things that are pushing us around? The essay then starts to identify the forces in our modern world that the author believes are constantly trying to knock us off balance.
According to the essay, a few aspects of modern culture can act like those destabilizing forces. The author specifically calls out things like secularization and what they describe as cultures created without God. There's also the pressure to just conform, to follow the crowd. And a big one is the influence of postmodernism, which is a way of thinking that often questions whether a single, absolute truth can even exist.
To really frame this challenge, the author brings in this quote from the Apostle Paul. The point being made here is that staying centered isn't a passive thing. It requires you to actively work on your own mindset instead of just soaking up the values of the world around you.
So, if all these cultural pressures are the things trying to knock the top over, what does the author suggest is the center point? You know, the thing that can withstand it all.
The text really gets to the heart of a major tension here. In a society that often says, hey, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, anyone who holds on to the idea of a single universal truth can start to feel, well, kind of like an outsider, a stranger, as the author puts it.
And for the author, the source of that absolute truth is found right here in this famous statement from Jesus. Going back to our spinning top metaphor, this is presented as the ultimate, unshakable center point. It's the one solid tip on which a believer's whole life can spin and find its balance.
The essay then makes a really interesting comparison to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who famously asked Jesus, "What is truth?" The author suggests that a lot of people today are like Pilate. They ask the question, but maybe they don't really want an answer. This is contrasted with those who, from the author's perspective, belong to the truth and are therefore able to recognize it when they hear.
All right, so let's bring it all home. How does this all come together and get us back to that simple spinning top on the ice?
Here's the core takeaway. For a life to be truly stable, truly unwavering, its foundation has to be set on something that doesn't change. The author argues that having a clear goal for life that is rooted in God is what gives you the direction you need to stay on that true path.
So what does this centered life actually look like? Well, according to the essay, it's a life with a rock-solid foundation and a clear sense of purpose. It's consistent, and it's able to resist getting pulled off course, whether that's by our own selfish desires or by pressure from the outside world.
And there it is. We're right back to the spinning top. It's such a brilliant image, isn't it?
Once a top is spinning perfectly on its center, it really doesn't take much to keep it going. Just a little tap here and there. And the essay argues a life built on a firm foundation is exactly the same. It develops its own momentum, its own resilience, and just needs small corrections to keep spinning true.
So after all that, from a childhood memory on a frozen field to the very nature of truth, the author leaves us with one final big question to think about. Where is the center of your life?